About a week ago, I received this comment on one of my old videos, and I responded pretty much right away, but I haven't stopped thinking about it all week, and so I wanted to go ahead and just make a video pretty much just discussing the last sentence in my response. And so here it is. And I went ahead and sped it up for you, just to try to keep the whole thing as concise as possible.
So basically, I believe that pretty much all of YWAM's issues are rooted in and based on their extremely dangerous and unhealthy perspectives on authority. So even from an early age, I was taught that, if someone's in a position of authority over you, that doesn't always make them right. And I think that's pretty obvious. I think most people inherently know that because we went to a lot of different churches. We moved around a lot. And so I naturally sat under lots of different teachings, lots of different pastors and Sunday school teachers, et cetera, et cetera. And, having to discern between right and wrong and truth and not truth, my parents wanted me to be a critical thinker. They wanted me to learn to take what I was taught with a grain of salt. And I think that's just a healthy part of learning and a natural part of learning. But within the wider church in general, there is this issue with looking at someone, a pastor or a spiritual leader, who is in, some position over you, and looking at them as if they are somehow infallible, or even more spiritually mature than you are just because of the position they're in. And that allows for insane amounts of abuse and manipulation and control. That was where the majority of my issues with my time there lied. That's where they stemmed from, because I was not raised to just submit to authority because it is authority for the sake of being authority. I think that sometimes YWAM's position is not so black and white because if you're in a DTS and you've got the 3 months of lecture phase or however long it is for you, and you've got a bunch of different speakers saying a lot of different conflicting things, and they understand that you're going to hear some conflicting things from week to week. So they'll come in a lot of times, not all of them for sure. I'm not going to name drop, but cough, cough, Shirley Brownhill. Most of them will come in and be like, this is my opinion, and, you're welcome to do with this as you will. And I respected that. I think that let me let my guard down, hearing that week after week from different speakers that I learned to respect. Because I thought, okay, they're not trying to be controlling or manipulative here. They're really, letting us know that this is their opinion, and they're not acting like everything they believe is just fact, and they're not trying to force us to take it as fact. Like, they're giving us the space to interpret for ourselves, and I loved that. What I discovered further down the road was that this is not really practiced as much as it's preached in YWAM, and that was really disappointing. But more than disappointing, it was really hurtful and damaging long term. And it's what distinguished outreach from lecture phase, because lecture phase you're learning all these things, and I mentioned this in a video before, like what really distinguishes the two is that lecture phase you're really allowed to have this space to yourself to kind of contemplate and do with everything that you're taking in as you will, but you don't have that same freedom on outreach. You're really expected to just kind of go with the flow, and like you make this commitment before you leave to submit to your leaders no matter what, even if your leaders ask you to do something which you know to be wrong, which you know to be unethical or immoral or whatever. Even if they ask you to do something which you 100% disagree with, you must submit to their authority because God put them there. And they say, God will deal with them. That's on them. That's their sin. God will punish them for, causing you to do this thing. You won't be punished. You'll be probably rewarded because you were obedient and submissive. And maybe I can see how theoretically some people would buy that, especially after we were forced to read one of our books, which I also mentioned in the previous video, which was called A Tale of Three Kings, and I'll link that in the description also. It was a short book, kind of poetically written. I actually really enjoyed reading it and writing the essay about it. It was entertaining, at least. But I remember wondering on lecture phase what the relevance was and why, of all the books we could have read, why that was the one they chose. And it didn't click until outreach that the reason they had us read this book was solely for the purpose of control. Basically, if you don't remember from the last video, just to reiterate, the book, well, at least a huge part of it was about David and Saul's relationship and how Saul was this abusive king, especially to David, and David still submitted to Saul as his king and to his authority. He didn't run away, whatever, like he, just took all of the abuse. And that was because Saul was anointed by God. And like the book is kind of about how, like, it specifically says you can't know who God's anointed are, so it's best to just submit to anyone in a position of authority over you. And I think at the time when I read it, I thought it was more in relation to like government authority, like political authority, workplace authority. I wasn't thinking in terms of spiritual authority because that wasn't really directly mentioned. So, I thought, sure, like, if you have a really toxic boss, like, don't repay evil with evil. Like, that's kind of how I interpreted it at the time. It wasn't until further down the road that I realized that's not where they were going with it and not the purpose of us reading it at all. Like, they tried to flip that around and use that against us. That teaching within YWAM is where all of the abuse stems from, just point blank period. Just to give you a little bit of an anecdote, which I think I also mentioned in one of my previous videos briefly, was to go back to what I said about how maybe I can see someone buying that in theory, and just the idea of, hypothetically, if you're asked to do something morally incomprehensible, just go along with it because, whatever, they'll be punished, not you. Nobody really expects to be in that position, so maybe I can understand being like, oh yeah, sure, whatever. But it's not really until, I would like to believe that most people, when actually faced with that dilemma, would choose to do the right thing, which is not obey this person who is telling them to do something immoral or unethical. And I learned what kind of person I am. I think a lot of people on my DTS learned what kind of person they are when faced with that dilemma. On my outreach, we were asked to do several things that we kind of didn't agree with, or that seemed a little dangerous, or we weren't really comfortable with, whatever. Most of the time it was a little bit of a gray area, or it wasn't so bad that we just kind of were like, whatever, okay, we'll go along with it. But there was one time in particular where it was just very black and white, and we all just simultaneously put our foot down, and we just agreed we're not doing this thing. And it was like our leaders were still very much, no, we're going to do this, whatever. They were asking us to do something that if we did it could potentially put another family's whole like lives, ministry, everything in danger. And so we were like, we're not doing that to them because it didn't really have as much of effect on us. And so I was very proud of us in that moment, and I think it definitely demonstrated to me and everyone else that whole concept of just submitting no matter what is really not okay. In actuality, maybe that's just me.
It's difficult to really describe what it feels like to go from embracing basically this entirely new worldview and lifestyle to then suddenly realizing in the worst possible moment that you don't actually agree with any of it and that it doesn't really work out in application. But then there's no escape from it because then you're surrounded by it and you're basically forced to live this lifestyle. There's so much fear and anxiety that came out of that realization in the worst possible moment. I felt panicked. I didn't have the words to describe what was happening. I just knew that I was very, very confused because I just spent 3 months learning all of these things that sounded mostly good in theory, to then having this shock and rude awakening when the rose-colored glasses were just ripped from my eyes, and everything that I was doing, that I was being told to do, looked terrible to me. It all sounded and looked disgusting and wrong and manipulative, and I could not then take what I was feeling and pass it on to other people But that was the whole point of us being there. The whole point of outreach was to take what we had learned and to pass it on to people in third world countries. And I just understood that this was really bad. And I was in a very bad, dangerous situation. Describe the intense levels of cognitive dissonance that I was dealing with, to the point that I thought I was actually going insane. I thought I was losing my mind. And there was evidence to support it, because I had the first panic attacks of my entire life, and I didn't even know what a panic attack was. I was so on edge that I snapped at people in my sleep and didn't even remember it afterwards. I've never done that in my whole life, and I haven't done it since. I was just under such stress and had no outlet, no privacy, no escape. As an introvert especially, outreach is a nightmare because you really don't get any time to yourself, any alone time. I remember there was one point where we were staying on another YWAM base in Papua New Guinea, and they gave us a hut with 3 rooms. One of the rooms had 2 beds in it, and it was supposed to be for our leaders, but they knew that me and one of the other girls were pretty much the only introverts on our whole team. And so they very graciously offered the room to us. And suddenly my whole, I didn't realize how much the introversion thing affected me until those few days that I got that room to myself, because instantly, within a few hours, I was feeling more myself for the first time, because you don't get any time to, you don't even get to shower by yourself. You're showering in lakes and buckets and anything that you can come up with. There is no time to just get away and decompress. Your schedule is completely controlled. The food that goes into your body is completely controlled. The clothing that you wear, what you're allowed to wear, is completely controlled. To a certain degree, even how you think and express yourself, especially through your ministry, is controlled by someone other than yourself. Everything is controlled by someone other than yourself. And the fact of the matter is, I didn't trust the people who were in control. I wouldn't wish this whole experience on my worst enemy. Of course, there were reasons why we didn't have freedom in some of these things, and that wasn't always bad per se. The point is to demonstrate how little autonomy and control you have over your own body, even in the small things. And on a much smaller scale, they would try to control the way we behaved and even our attitudes in ways that I found to be completely inappropriate, in ways that even exceeded parental jurisdiction. I remember one of the base leaders telling me over the phone once, a little after I posted my original video, that they never said anything to me that they wouldn't have said to me had I been their little sister. And what I wanted to say to them was, but I am not your little sister. That is not an excuse to be condescending to someone. The reason we allow our families, our parents, to say certain things to us, the reason why it is appropriate for them to be harsh or critical, is because they have relationships to us and they know us like that. And therein lies the whole twisted issue. You're expected to trust and punish for not trusting people who have never earned that trust or even outright proven to be unworthy of it. You're asked to literally put your life in their hands and not allowed to question the hands that hold you, because if you do, they will squeeze the life out of you, and they did this to me. They drained me to the point that I was virtually unrecognizable to my friends and family when I returned home, and it has taken me 2 years to recover. And I still have a long way to go. This isn't an issue of rooted bitterness or unforgiveness or unwillingness to move on from the past. I continue to make these videos only because YWAM continues to hurt people, and even though I know they will likely never stop at this point, I will never stop trying to prevent people from going through the hell that I went through.